If a single bite of fried chicken is enough to make a CEO put down his fork, then what exactly is happening in that kitchen? On a sun-drenched afternoon along Beale Street, Caleb Dorsey stood silently in front of the first store he ever built with his own hands and his grandmother's cooking, Golden Drumstick. 18 years ago, it was nothing more than a small tin-roofed kitchen, serving fried chicken made from the secret recipe left behind by Georgia Dorsey, a woman who had spent her life hustling in the American South. Today, the brand had spread to over 200 cities, featured in financial news and major talk shows. But there were no cameras following Caleb today. He wasn't wearing a suit, didn't carry a name badge, and there was no entourage behind him. Just a man in a faded khaki jacket, worn jeans, and an old baseball cap, carrying a kind of unease he couldn't quite name. Caleb had heard executives say, "Don't let emotions interfere with the data." But when he looked at the latest quarterly report, showing a 19% drop in profits and over 3,000 customer complaints saying the chicken doesn't taste like it used to, he knew those weren't just numbers. They were cries for help, a signal that something once deeply true and real was slowly vanishing. And he needed emotion, the emotion of a man who had once stood over a fryer for 14 hours a day, who mixed flour and spices by hand until the kitchen filled with the warm scent of cinnamon, thyme, and black pepper. Today, Caleb returned to where it all began, not as the owner, but as a stranger looking for dinner. He wanted to know, with his own mouth, whether the chicken here still carried the family legacy, or if it had become just another commercial imitation. He pushed open the door, the familiar chime ringing like an echo from the past. A young woman with a tired smile stood behind the counter. Her name tag read Talia. "Table for one?" Caleb nodded, his voice laced with a touch of old Southern charm. "I heard this was the best fried chicken in Tennessee. Drove all day to find out." Talia led him to a corner table and handed him the menu with a weary expression. Not a single flicker of recognition. That was fine. Caleb ordered a 3-piece plate, leg, wing, breast, with mashed potatoes, coleslaw, and a soft buttermilk biscuit. "Sweet tea?" she asked. "Double sweet," he replied with a grin, as if playing the younger version of himself at 25. Once Talia walked away, Caleb scanned the room. Everything looked fine on the surface. Clean tables, soft lighting, mellow background music. But something felt off. A flickering bulb in the corner, a stained patch on the ceiling, a greasy, faded menu. Small details, but worrying. Georgia used to say, "If you don't keep the kitchen clean and bright, the chicken's gonna taste dim and dirty too." Itchy. He noticed only 3 people working in the kitchen when a B-level branch like Memphis should have 5 during dinner rush. But tonight, the tables were half empty. A family with 2 children left the restaurant looking unimpressed. Caleb furrowed his brow. When his plate arrived, he inhaled deeply. The chicken looked right. Golden brown, crispy breading clinging to juicy skin, a fragrance rising from a familiar blend of 11 spices. But from the first bite, he stopped. The crunch was there, the mild heat was there, but the warmth of aged cinnamon, the soft lingering of basil oil on the finish, they were gone. Caleb set the piece down and tried the breast. Still nothing. This wasn't George's legacy. This was a close copy, close enough to fool a first-time diner, but far from what made Golden Drumstick different for nearly 2 decades. And then, as he sipped his overly sweet tea, he heard something that turned dinner into a eulogy. From the service station near the counter, 2 hushed voices, 1 male, 1 female. "Troy, keep it down. If anyone hears, we're screwed." "Who's gonna hear, Talia?" The guy chuckled softly. "That chicken's long gone. My account's got 20 grand more in it. Everything's taken care of." Caleb didn't turn his head, but his hand gripped the napkin like it was the last gate between him and the storm rising inside. Fried chicken is food, yes, but it's also memory, family, dignity. And now, someone had taken that away, not just from the recipe, but from the soul of the brand he had built. The laughter behind him, soft, steady, smug, was like a silent challenge. "You're not in control anymore, Caleb Dorsey." But they were wrong. He was still here. And from that moment forward, Caleb's unofficial investigation had officially begun. Caleb Dorsey sat motionless at the particle board table by the window, his fingers gently swirling the last of his now watery sweet tea, his ears sharply attuned to the service station. The voices of two employees, Talia and a man named Troy, whom he had never met, cut through the air like thin blades. "They have no idea," Troy continued, his voice rising with smug confidence. "The recipe's in Firebird's hands now. They tweaked it just enough to avoid a lawsuit, but who can really tell? The boss never shows up anyway." Talia was quiet for a second before asking softly, "What about Darren? Does he know?" "Of course," Troy laughed, short and dry. "He's getting a cut. Without Darren, there's no way it clears distribution." Caleb slowly bowed his head, quietly pulling his phone from his coat pocket and switching on the voice recorder. Every word sank into his chest like a needle. Every name, every detail. Firebird Chicken, an old rival once sued for copying his brand identity, was now behind something called the Golden Copycat, a product clearly inspired by Grandma George's original recipe, a formula Caleb had vowed would never leave the hands of the 5 trusted people in his inner circle. And now, somehow, it sat in a rival's kitchen, delivered by the very people he had once trusted most. Leaning back in his chair, Caleb stared through the dusty glass window. Why Memphis? Why the First Branch? The one where his grandmother had stood behind the counter serving each piece of chicken, her greetings still echoing in the kitchen's old walls. The same kitchen where he'd scrubbed floors until 2 in the morning, just to earn enough to open again the next day. He felt something sacred had been taken from him, not just a recipe, but loyalty. This betrayal didn't come from the outside, it came from within his own kitchen. When Troy and Talia walked away from the counter, Caleb rose, adjusted his jacket, and casually approached the register. He paid in cash and left a generous tip, not because he was satisfied, but to keep the cover intact. "Thank you for dining with us," Talia said without looking up from the POS screen. Caleb gave a slight nod, letting his gaze brush her face one last time. If she had known who he really was, her eyes might not have been so cold. By the time he stepped into the parking lot, the sky had turned dim. Gray clouds hung like curtains before a play that had yet to begin. He stood there for a while, not starting the engine, then pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. June Tran, head of internal security, a former FBI investigator who had helped him uncover 2 major financial frauds the year before. "June," he said quietly, "I need you to check all internal logins to the recipe database, 90 days back, and focus on one name, Benjamin Craig." A short pause on the line. "The VP of Strategy?" "Yes," Caleb answered, his voice like steel. "And don't let anyone else know. I'm returning to Beale Street tomorrow, but not as myself." He hung up and exhaled slowly. His heart thudded in his chest, not from fear, but resolve. When he was a boy, his grandmother once told him, "Not everyone who wears an apron knows how to cook, Caleb, just like not everyone who signs a paycheck deserves to lead." Her words rang in his ears like a calling. That night, he didn't go back to the hotel. He drove to a rundown motel near the riverfront, paid cash for a single room, and checked in under a fake name, Luke Harris. Inside his small suitcase were no pressed shirts, only old work clothes, steel-toe boots, and an ID badge forged years ago by his security team, for moments just like this. Before turning off the light, Caleb pulled out a worn photo from his wallet. It was Grandma Georgia, beaming beside a pot of boiling oil. He brushed a finger along the photo's edge and whispered, "I won't let them take what you left us. I swear." Tomorrow, Caleb Dorsey, the billionaire founder of Golden Drumstick, would no longer be chairman. He would be Luke Harris, a dishwasher applying for a job at the Beale Street location. And from within, he would begin dismantling the wall of betrayal, brick by brick. Not with power, not with fury, but with observation, with wisdom, and with time. The sky had not yet brightened, and a thin mist clung to the edges of the Beale Street branch's back parking lot. A man with a slightly hunched posture, worn-out shoes, and an old flannel shirt blended into the shadows like someone long accustomed to being unseen. This was not Caleb Dorsey, the man who once spoke at the Forbes Forum or graced the cover of Time magazine. This was Luke Harris, a laid-off worker from another state, recently hired as a temporary dishwasher for $11 an hour with no benefits. At least, that was the story he wrote on his application. Darren Mitchell, the branch manager, barely glanced at Caleb's disguised form before flipping through the employment file with the indifference of someone waiting on a coffee brew rather than reviewing a human being. "No interview?" Caleb asked, voice altered. "Can I just start straight away?" Darren shrugged. As long as you don't violate health codes or spill food on the guests, you're in. Start tonight. Shift runs from 3 p.m. to close. Caleb nodded, smiling with the same humble grin he wore 20 years earlier when applying for a dishwashing job to support his grandmother. Within 24 hours, Luke Harris became one of the invisible crew, the people who stand behind the counter, wipe down plastic trays, mop up grease trails from the fryers, and wash hundreds of nameless utensils. No one asked where he came from. No one wondered why a middle-aged man would take such a grueling job for such little pay. And that suited him perfectly. Because from that vantage point, Caleb saw more than he expected. Beneath the sweat and the sting of bleach, he observed silently. Troy, the sous chef, wasn't just arrogant. He appeared to control the ingredient orders. Boxes of mislabeled spices, sacks of untraceable flour slowly replaced the official drumstick blend, a proprietary mix that headquarters only distributed through a secure channel. Talia, the front server, routinely skipped the dish-checking process to shorten service time, leading to more order mistakes but faster table turnover. Most disturbingly, Caleb noticed Miguel, a quiet, kind stockroom worker, become visibly tense whenever Darren entered the storage area. In Miguel's eyes, something was wrong, but he never dared to say it aloud. Caleb remembered everything, every glance, every deliberate mistake, every time Darren dropped by while Troy logged shipments without using the scanner. And each night, back at the motel, Caleb typed detailed reports to June Tran, the former FBI investigator now quietly reviewing Benjamin Craig's access logs at headquarters. The deeper they looked, the clearer the picture became. Firebird hadn't just acquired the recipe. They had been handed Golden Drumstick's supply chain data, expansion maps, and weekly ingredient distribution schedules. The turning point came on the 5th night. Caleb was scrubbing the fryer station when he overheard a conversation between Darren and Troy inside the employee lounge. "Benjamin says we need to push the next batch to Firebird sooner," Darren muttered. "He's worried corporate's catching on to the access breaches from last month. We need to wrap this up before internal audit shows up." "And that new guy, Luke," Troy added, irritated. "He watches everything. I swear he's not just some dishwasher." Caleb clenched his fist, cold sweat beading at the back of his neck. He knew a single misstep could collapse the entire disguise, but he also knew he was close to breaking the case wide open. That night, he quietly removed his apron and installed a micro camera beneath the break room counter, where Troy and Darren often gathered. Then he sent an encrypted message to June. "Be ready. The confrontation needs to happen sooner than planned. Everything is moving." And in that fleeting moment before switching off the light in his small motel room, Caleb looked down at his hands. Hands that once signed million-dollar contracts, now red and raw from scrubbing grease, and smiled. Because he knew, only by descending into the filth could a leader truly see who was the dirtiest. And right there, in the grime, he had begun to find the truth. Saturday night dinner service at Beale Street was usually the busiest of the week, but inside Golden Drumstick, there was no buzz, no urgency. Customers trickled in sparsely, most of them older locals, while the staff moved through their tasks with a strange mix of fatigue and guarded silence. Caleb, in the form of Luke Harris, kept his head down at the dish station, his ears tuned to every footstep, every voice, every glance. But tonight, his focus wasn't on Darren or Troy. It was on someone else, the third player no one had paid much attention to until now. Talia. Talia was nothing like Troy. She didn't radiate arrogance and she didn't gloat. She worked fast, sometimes too fast, but never lazily. And in her eyes, there was something fractured, a kind of pressure Caleb only noticed when he saw her standing alone in the stockroom, gripping a towel too tightly, staring into space like she was weighing something heavy. He chose his moment carefully, when the kitchen was fully occupied and she was alone, counting sauce containers in the back room. He stepped in, set down a cardboard box, and asked, "You all right?" Talia froze. "Me? Yeah, just tired." Caleb bent down and pretended to sort through supplies, all the while placing a recording device June had given him that morning. "I heard you've been here longer than Darren," he said quietly. "You must have seen how things have changed." Talia bit her lip, then suddenly sighed. "Luke, what do you think of the chicken here?" Caleb looked up, their eyes meeting. It's not golden drumstick anymore. Her expression softened. I used to love it here. I learned how to place each biscuit without breaking it, how to toss coleslaw just right. But now I feel like I'm pretending. Caleb stayed silent, waiting. And then she said it. Troy made me use the substitute seasoning. I didn't know it was fake at first. I thought it came from corporate. But then I saw the invoices from somewhere else. They told me to shut up, said if I didn't go along, Darren would cut my hours. And I need the money. Caleb spoke gently. Did you know that recipe was passed to Firebird? Talia's eyes widened. No, I thought it was just a cost-cutting blend. Caleb nodded. They sold it, along with our entire distribution model. Talia stepped back as if her world had just tilted. She whispered, So I helped them, and didn't even know it. A heavy silence settled between them. Caleb stepped closer, his voice low. I'm not here to make you feel guilty, Talia. I need to know if you're willing to help me expose what's really going on. Talia looked him in the eye for the first time, like she was trying to see through the mask of Luke Harris. Then she asked, Who are you really? Just then, the back door creaked open. Darren stood in the doorway, his eyes razor sharp. Looks like the two of you are having a rather private conversation. Talia responded quickly. I'm just showing Luke how to log the inventory. Darren didn't reply, just signaled with a nod. Luke, someone spilled sweet tea near table 7. Go clean it. Caleb nodded and walked past him, feeling Darren's hand grip his shoulder, firm and threatening. That night, Caleb knew his cover was no longer secure, not because of a slip-up, but because of Talia's shift, someone trapped between fear and remorse. And that, he knew, was more volatile than full-blown betrayal, because people like her are the first to be cut when the system goes into self-defense mode. Back in his motel room, Caleb reviewed the recording. The conversation was enough to use as leverage, but not enough to bring down Darren or Benjamin. Still, Talia could be the key, and he had to move fast, because as June had warned in her last message, headquarters detected 3 unauthorized logins. Benjamin knows someone's investigating. He'll act soon. Caleb set his phone down and stared through the dusty window into the night sky. He knew time was running out. But if he could pull Talia to his side, he'd have something they never expected, a witness from inside. Someone who had once hesitated, but might now choose to stand on the side of what's right. The next morning, tension hung in the Beale Street kitchen like a tightened wire. Caleb walked in with a steady but guarded pace, his eyes silently scanning each familiar yet distant face. Talia avoided his gaze with a whisper of guilt. Troy smirked like a man who believed he still held control, and Darren stood in the center like a stage director waiting for the final act. But what made Caleb pause wasn't them. It was the appearance of 2 unfamiliar figures. One in a charcoal gray suit, the other tall, cold, dressed in a tailored outfit without a single wrinkle. Under the flickering fluorescent light that reflected off the greasy floor, Caleb Dorsey's face, despite the disguise, tightened with gravity. Good morning, the man in the gray suit spoke first. I'm Lawrence Wynn, strategic representative from Firebird Chicken, and this is Mr. Benjamin Craig, your head of strategy. We're just passing through to check a few expansion metrics, internal matters only. Caleb felt every vein at the back of his neck tighten like wire. Benjamin, the very man Grandma Georgia once considered family, was now standing in the same kitchen where she used to peel potatoes, his eyes glazed with the kind of arrogance that no longer recognized the word brother. There was no doubt left. This was the cleanup crew before the collapse of Golden Drumstick. Caleb stepped back and quickly texted June Tran a single line. They're here. Call legal. Call the police. Call everyone. But before he could turn away, Darren moved forward, dragging a metal chair to the center of the floor, clapping his hands twice. Everyone gather up. We're having a quick meeting. Talia came close to Caleb, her eyes fixed on Darren as she whispered, They wiped all the backup footage last night. You have to act now. Caleb gave a faint nod. He stepped forward, no longer hunched, no longer silent. He took off his cap, removed the thick glasses, and tore off the tape that masked his salt and pepper hairline. The kitchen froze. Caleb Dorsey, the founder and CEO, the man who once mixed batter by hand, was no longer Luke Harris. He stood tall, his voice steady and firm. Good morning. I'm Caleb Dorsey, and this is my kitchen. Talia gasped. Troy stood paralyzed. Darren's face drained of color, but Benjamin didn't flinch. We don't need theatrics, Caleb, he said coolly. This can be handled internally. You're being paranoid. And you, Caleb interrupted, have been reckless. He pulled out his phone and played a recording, the conversation between Darren and Troy in the storage room. Discussions of erasing system logs, accepting payments from Firebird, and tagging counterfeit stock as official inventory. Then came Benjamin's voice, smooth and cold. Make it clean. By the time they catch on, we'll have already purchased the 3 lots next to their flagship. Lawrence tried to interject. You have no right to record. Caleb played the next file, an extracted email thread between Benjamin and Firebird, recovered by June from a mirrored server. Operation Orange Peel, finalize recipe transfer, push Southeast Market data, sign off by weekend. He paused the playback, looking directly at Lawrence. And you thought I wouldn't be ready? At that moment, the back door swung open. June Tran entered, flanked by 2 police officers and Golden Drumstick's legal team. We have a search warrant and digital evidence of intellectual property theft, supply chain sabotage, and internal system breaches. A staff member handed over the case folder to law enforcement. Talia whispered, You did it. Darren was the first to be cuffed, screaming and resisting. Troy stood frozen, his mouth wide open. Benjamin, in one final burst of arrogance, stepped toward Caleb. I built your expansion strategy. You won't survive the lawsuit coming your way. Caleb stepped in, his stare colder than steel. My grandmother used to say, a strategist without loyalty is just a pan without a bottom. You taught me a painful lesson, Benjamin, but unfortunately for you, I learned fast. Benjamin was led out in silence. Talia stood watching, eyes wet but no longer afraid. And Caleb, standing in the now quiet kitchen where there was no longer the crackle of oil or the roar of flame, bent down and picked up the old battered pot his grandmother once used, the very thing from which it all began. 1 month after the explosive unmasking at Beale Street, the headquarters of Golden Drumstick lit up before sunrise. In the grand hall on the ground floor, once reserved for financial strategy meetings with corporate advisors, rows of seats had been rearranged for a rare occasion, the rebirth of a legacy. Caleb Dorsey stepped onto the stage in a simple suit, no tie, no scripted speech in hand. His gaze settled on the front row, not filled with investors or board members, but with people rarely seen at corporate events. The Beale Street kitchen crew, longtime employees from the earliest days, and most notably, Talia, the one who overcame fear and chose to stand in the light. A few weeks ago, Caleb began, we faced a reckoning. A part of this company betrayed our most sacred value, trust. But what I want to emphasize today is not the betrayal, but the people who didn't bow their heads. The ones who chose to do the right thing, even when no one asked them to. The room fell silent. Caleb clicked a remote, and behind him appeared an image. Georgia Dorsey, gray-haired, dressed in her brown-patterned housecoat, holding a wooden spoon beside a pan of bubbling oil. The photo had been carefully restored from the family's private archive. This is the woman who taught me that food isn't just to fill your stomach. It's to remind people of what is kind and good. And today, with her blessing and yours, I'd like to announce what I believe is most right. Golden Drumstick will return to its original recipe, enhanced only by the spirit of this generation. A curtain pulled back, revealing an old wooden table with the same cast iron pot from years ago. On top, a new plate of fried chicken. Not flashy, but the golden crust, the aroma of black pepper, celery seed, herbs, and a subtle sweet spicy finish made more than a few in the crowd swallow hard. Caleb bowed slightly, raising the plate high in both hands like a ceremonial offering. Introducing Grandma Georgia's Legacy Chicken, a dish that restores not just a recipe, but the spirit of cooking with heart. And beginning next month, every Golden Drumstick location across the country will serve this recipe. No one is allowed to change a single ingredient, not even me. Thunderous applause erupted. But Caleb wasn't done. He gestured for Talia to join him on stage. She hesitated, then stepped forward, nervous but her eyes steadier than ever before. She's one of the reasons this truth came to light, Caleb said. And instead of punishment, We're choosing to empower the ones who chose to stop at the right moment. Starting today, Talia will be our Director of Employee Support, a program designed to protect those facing financial hardship so they'll never have to compromise their values just to get by. The entire room rose to its feet. Talia said nothing, just wiped her tears quietly and bowed her head. Then came the moment that made the press stay in their seats, wide-eyed, unwilling to miss a word. Caleb's final announcement. Beginning next quarter, we're launching a program called From the Fryer Up. Every executive on the leadership team must work 1 full week per quarter at a random branch, as a regular team member. No exceptions, no titles, because no leader understands the organization until they've scrubbed a grease-stained floor. The hall erupted again, not because of a PR stunt, but because, for the first time, a company wasn't being reborn through a marketing budget, but through a commitment to its original spirit. That night, Caleb stood alone in the modest kitchen that once served as his grandmother's first restaurant. The space had been preserved like a museum. On the wall hung a letter from Georgia, written to Caleb when he was 14. You can fail 1,000 times, but if you hold on to what's right even once, I'll be proud. He gently touched the frame, closed his eyes. Outside, the digital sign atop headquarters flickered its new motto: Golden Drumstick, cooked with purpose, served with pride. And this time, no one could steal that. No one could take a legacy guarded by the heart that built it. In business, the formula for success isn't written on paper. It's revealed in how we protect our values when no one is watching. Caleb Dorsey didn't choose anger, he didn't choose the media. He chose to return to where it all began, standing quietly among the smell of frying oil and whispers of betrayal, to reclaim what money could never buy: loyalty and integrity. If you believe that legacy isn't something to show off but something to protect through action, then like this video, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories that revive what truly matters, and don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase "guard the recipe," so we know you believe some things are still worth keeping.